WCLN 1170 Radio and Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by J.W. Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know is on the air. I want to thank you for being with us today. Each and every week at 2:30, we're simulcast on WCLN Radio. Also, there's replays of this, 7 p.m. Tuesday, Thursday, Star Communications, TV Channel 16 and 316. Today, we're talking about hearing. We're talking about things that we should know more about, and we're talking with Dr. Meredith Hill. Dr. Hill, I want to thank you for taking your time to come back to Sampson County. I want to thank you for the efforts you have put into your profession, but I want to open, I guess, first with the concept of at what point in time and what was the calling, if it was a calling for you, to get into this profession as a doctor of audiology?
Sure. So actually at the company where I am currently, Meredith, we have a This Is Why, hashtag This Is Why. And it's exactly what you've just said. It's our calling. It's what makes us as professionals and us as a company beat as a heart. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I come from family educators, and we were just discussing that my mother was here in the city schools for over 30 years. And I thought I wanted to go into education. I too wanted to be a teacher. And my mother told me, Meredith, you can be anything you want, just please don't be an educator. And I said, okay, all right. And so that caused me to look a little deeper. And I actually explored the route of speech-language pathology, which is closely aligned with audiology. Speech and hearing go hand in hand. If you think about it, you can't form a sound if you don't know how that sound sounds. True. So as I explored speech therapy, I uncovered more about audiology, and I was able to see that with the profession of audiology, I could diagnose and treat someone's ailment and change their life for the better. And that's what I've been doing. I started out in a clinical setting in Raleigh, and it's been almost 8 years now since I've transitioned over to Meredith, which is more on the industry side of things.
It's interesting. When I look at your background too, you were director of audiology at Carolina Ear Hearing Clinic there in Raleigh,
right? And
from that you transitioned to the company, the international company mm-hmm. that you're with now. And Meredith is one of the leading, as some of the literature I read, the top 3 in the world in innovative design and technology and hearing. I want to kind of segue back to the education piece. Mm-hmm. How important is it that although you didn't do what mom wanted you to do, uh-huh. You ended up being a doctor of audiology, receiving your doctorate degree from UNC, undergraduate, North Carolina State University. I think it's an interesting kind of tie. I appreciate the red you're wearing today, but that's an interesting tie. Is there part of that you look back at and say, if I had this or if I had that, you may be somewhere, but you're totally focused. I mean, this is your life now.
Right. So, not to throw Mama under the bus for telling me not to become an educator. She certainly meant well. And actually, the irony is that by not becoming an educator, I became a doctor. Mm-hmm. But the labels, none of that was important to me. My goal was to help. And, at the time, the doctoral program of audiology was a relatively new program. It had only been in the last few years that they were requiring the doctoral mm-hmm. level degree. And so I knew going into undergrad, if that's what I wanted to do, I was in for the long haul. I was in for 8 years of education after high school. And so, I put those blinders on and I focused, and I was able to graduate from NC State and join a cohort of only 8 individuals at Carolina to go on and get our doctorate in 2011. So it was a big part of my life then, making that decision, because I had to be very focused. But I'm so glad because of the outcome of being able to help.
I think that's great. And I'm glad you brought that out, because I was not going to get into that. But being part of the top 8 to actually step up and say, I'm going to get labeled with this. And plus, there's a greater expectation when you put the doctorate along with that degree field. But since 2011, you've done very well, because your husband, AC, you guys have 2 beautiful sons, Mason and Matthew, and you live in Raleigh. So it hadn't all been work.
Oh, no.
You have had, and you're a good example of the talent that we have and that comes from this county and the eastern part of the state.
Absolutely, yeah.
So let's get into this a little bit and talk about not only what's going on in the world of hearing, but I want to kind of phase back. March 3rd, I know that's a little behind us now, and I missed the date because I wanted to get this in, but March 3rd was Worldwide Hearing, I guess you would call it Hearing Day. For a lot of people, it's constantly an issue, but the theme, I want to touch on this theme. It says, to hear for life, listen with care, ! Tell us what that means to you.
So what it means to me is what a lot of us did not grow up doing, and it was not really practiced or preached, is that conservation or preservation of one of your 5 main senses, which is hearing. And just to give a little background and a little education piece about hearing, your ear is actually comprised of 3 different parts. Now, most people look at a human and they see an ear. What they're seeing is the first part, which is the outer ear, but that funnels and leads to the middle ear, which then leads to the inner ear. So those are the 3 parts of the ear. And really the nerve is at the end of all of that structure, the inner ear. And that's where, once the damage occurs, can be permanent and long lasting. And that's where it's hard to get any hearing back once it's lost. So to hear with care, to listen with care, means to preserve that nerve hearing and to protect your system from loud sounds, from damaging sounds, and exposure, long periods of time in such loud sounds, which growing up on farms, going to concerts, those types of things, just wasn't really at the forefront. So
I think it's a damaging issue, and when I look at the education and the theme for the day, actually it should be every day of every of the year. But when I look at that, it kind of reminds me that we need to look at it more as part of our process of health. So the question would be, is that something that should be part of our, quote, annual health checkups? Most of the most organizations I've been to, it's not necessarily part of that. I mean, you've got to have a, quote, sign to say, maybe I need to get that checked.
Right. So it's interesting that when a baby's born in North Carolina, they do have to pass a newborn hearing screening before they are exited from the hospital. But after that, the policies in place are not such that it's a routine part of care and maintenance. So when someone reaches adulthood, and it's been years since they were screened or even maybe tested or screened in an elementary school setting, it's hard to tell how much damage has occurred. And then they reach the point of middle age, and that's when just routine wear and tear. You don't even have to be daily attending concerts or working on a farm to just have daily exposure to sounds. If that starts to damage nerve hearing, then you may not know that until you reach 50, 55 years old, and you're starting to notice, well, I can hear, but I'm not always understanding everything I hear. Or I think she says this word when really she said that word. And that's how it starts to present. So yes, if you are not giving yourself a baseline test at middle age, or say 30, 40, 50 years of age, by the time you're past that, you may not know how much you've already lost.
I want to kind of stay on that thread for a moment. The interesting piece is, I was reading some of this, that oftentimes a person may be very intelligent, but if somebody don't pick up on the fact that they're not performing, that could be an audible issue. They may go through school, both elementary and high school, with C's, D's, or whatever. They may just not be picking up the audible piece, but if they're never tested, they never know. Right,
exactly. And unfortunately, nowadays with so many labels, a child could be labeled as attention deficit or some type of spectrum disorder, when in fact, if you're not getting down to the physiology and you don't know if they can hear and understand, then that could be the foundation of all of these other problems, issues, and diagnoses.
When you look at your career, what you've done, and obviously back when you were actually working in a clinic and supervising audiologists there, did you see a lot of children, or is it disproportionately more older people? How does that work?
Yeah, so in our practice specifically, we did not cater to a pediatric population, but that's because we were in an area that has some of the best resources for pediatrics. UNC hospitals, Duke, all of the major medical universities would be where I, as a mother and a professional, would send my child if there were pediatric hearing loss needs. So we didn't always see pediatrics. So by the time we were addressing hearing loss, it was well into adulthood and the geriatric population, which is not too late in most cases to address it. However, you certainly want some resources in place to do it before then.
We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, I want to talk a bit more about the education information piece of that, to get folks to understand that oftentimes if they don't have things checked out as a parent, then sometimes these things go by the wayside. And the tests and the processes, from what I can understand and read, is relatively simple. So let's touch on that when we come back. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a break. We'll be back in a moment. We're talking with Dr. Meredith Hill about hearing and about the importance of hearing for you and your children. We'll be back in a moment.
If you run a business, you need sales. To get sales, you need customers. To get customers, you need exposure. Let our team of experts craft and produce the perfect video ad to reach your intended audience while making the most of your advertising dollars. Call 1-800-706-6538 or visit starcom.net to contact our Star Communications production team and get your business moving to the next level.
Folks, welcome back. We Should Know is on there. I want to thank you for being with us today. If you happen to be watching us on Star Communications Channel 16 or 316, you may be driving down the road hearing us on WCLN radio, or you could pick us up on YouTube or some of the other frequencies. We're talking today, and hopefully you're hearing us well. We're talking with Dr. Meredith Hill, an audiologist. And Meredith, when we went to break, we were talking about this importance of the education piece. We've, of course, touted this show over now going on 11 years of being information and education. The education piece is not only critically important, but some of the statistics that I've looked at that basically says, kind of an eye-opening thing for 2022, we're looking at 430 plus million people worldwide. We're looking at that doubling just in the next decade. So I want to circle back to the education piece. Is that something we really need to kind of encourage a review of through our education system, to say this may be something we need to test more frequently?
Sure. As we were discussing, aside from newborn screenings and maybe kindergarten, first grade level screenings, there's really nothing to my knowledge in place, and there should be during a time when you're able to collectively gather children and get them resources that they may not get if they're on their own or with family. I think that there should be some processes in place throughout school and education systems that don't just stop after first grade.
What has been the impact, in your opinion, of the pandemic as it relates to identifying and dealing with hearing loss? Do you feel like folks has just kind of pushed that aside for the past 2 years?
Oh, sure. In fact, folks were doing that pre-COVID already. And a statistic has shown that from the time someone recognizes and admits to themselves that they are struggling with hearing until the time they actually do something about it, 7 years elapses on average. And whether that's just denial or vanity or whatever the factor may be, that's a large chunk of time. And you factor in a global pandemic that just adds a couple more years, people not wanting to get out for appointments, healthcare appointments that they may not deem necessary or medically necessary. And so you could be a decade into hearing loss before you're ever trying to address it. That could be a serious setback.
So with that said, just from experience point of view and I guess kind of a historical reference, there may be folks out there that have done that and put it off. Does that just make it even worse as opposed to catching it early on? Is it like other diseases or? Sure,
it can be. And some of that depends on the type of hearing loss. So as I educated on at the beginning of the segments, there are 3 different portions of the ear, and therefore these portions work differently and actually contribute to different types of hearing loss. So the outer ear is essentially a funnel, and some people's funnel's bigger than others, and it funnels sound down through the ear canal, and that will then vibrate the eardrum. And behind the eardrum live the 3 tiniest bones in your body. That's the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, affectionately known as the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. Oh, okay. Those are our 3 tiniest bones, and they just happen to reside in the middle ear space. And those are working together to send the signal then from the middle ear on up through the cochlea, which is the snail-shaped portion that's known as the inner ear. And once it reaches that, that's what people know as nerve hearing, or that's their hearing nerve sends the signal up to the brain. So there's a lot that has to transpire for sound to reach my voice to your ear. And because of that, one piece of the chain could be causing one type of hearing loss. Like we talked about earlier with nerve hearing, that is a permanent type of hearing loss. There are tiny hair cells in that cochlea structure that over time, as they get used and abused, multiple concerts, loud equipment, that sort of thing, those hair cells will die off. And at this point, there is no process for regenerating those hair cells. These hair cells maybe, but not the hearing hair cells. And so whenever those cells have died off, that frequency is affected. And typically, the way that the hair cells are structured, it's always the high frequencies, the high pitches that go first. And so whenever that happens, you start to hear people say, I can hear, but I can't understand. Now, I'm going to go a little deeper dive into why that is, because you think about sounds. All of the letters of the alphabet make a different sound. You have vowel sounds, ah, e, oo. Those are a lower pitch or a lower tone. So if those hearing hair cells are not impacted, you can hear ah, e, oo all day long, but you start to think about S, TH, the C's and the K's and the F's, all of those sounds fall into a high pitch or a high tone range. If you take a sentence and essentially erase everything but the vowels, does that make a lot of sense to you? No, you can hear it. You can tell that I'm talking to you, but you cannot differentiate what I'm saying. So that's why when that permanent type of hearing loss takes place, if it progresses to a certain point, there is no resolve other than to go in and artificially replace it with a cochlear implant. So,
of which I want to get into a little bit later. I want to stay on this just for a minute, though, because I think it's important for folks to understand that there is a threshold there. From what I hear you saying, that if you cross that threshold, there's no return. That how fragile or the fragility of it is such that it's gone and it's gone forever. It cannot be replaced. Science has not created an inner ear hair or particle that can replace it. Is that correct?
Right. As of currently, that is true. And so that goes back to your education piece on preserving what you have and trying to protect your hearing before you lose it. Now, in some capacities, people will lose hearing, and we can amplify that through a traditional hearing aid. As long as you get the volume up, they can hear it. And typically, that type of hearing loss is because of a conduction or a transmission problem. That's usually if there is an issue with the middle ear and sound can't pass to get to the nerve. So if you can just turn it up, get that volume louder and get it past the middle ear or the obstruction and get it to the nerve, essentially your hearing is as good as your nerve is. That's what I educate people. And so if we can turn up the volume and get it to the nerve, then they can hear and understand just fine. But if you think of your nerve as a speaker, if you turn up volume on a busted speaker or a ruptured speaker, it's not going to sound any clearer. It's just going to sound more distorted. So yes, you're right. There reaches a point where even a traditional hearing aid is no longer going to cut it, and you're going to have to seek artificial means.
The part of that process too, I was looking at my notes, and there's a psychological piece to that. You know, we're concerned about today the pandemic and what psychological impact it's having on children, what's going on in the world and the psychological impact. But that 5 cents piece, the hearing piece, it seems that is something that we've kind of missed psychologically, both in an older population as well as the general population. People can just kind of go into a shell. Absolutely.
In fact, there's a lot of depression and anxiety that gets associated with hearing loss. People can no longer participate in social settings or social environments because you introduce background noise that just muddies what they're hearing to begin with, and they cannot carry on conversations and follow conversations. They just retreat. And we see a lot of that with hearing loss, and older individuals are particularly susceptible to that. So that's why this is something you do want to catch early, and you do want to preserve early, and you want to treat early.
I think following that thought, I have actually heard folks say over the years, I just don't feel like being in crowds. And a lot of times these are older folks. And they say, I just don't feel like being in crowds. As we're having this conversation, it just causes me to think, was it at the time a hearing issue or something else? But it would seem to me that would make sense.
Absolutely. And we see it a lot. And like we were discussing before the segment, for whatever reason, hearing is one of those senses that you can seem to fake. If you lose your sight, it's going to become very apparent that you're having difficulty seeing. You'll run into things, not be able to drive. But with hearing, if you are losing it gradually over time, you can sort of adapt, adjust, maybe have a spouse do the talking for you. You may just smile and nod along when really you're not hearing and not understanding and not contributing. So it certainly is a piece that people is impacting more than just their hearing. It's impacting their entire lives.
What do you say to folks that are out there listening and they're thinking, well, you know, I feel like I've got an issue, or maybe they have a family member. Is there a way to approach that person without making them feel kind of degraded in any way?
So I will say that the thing I learned, sometimes the hard way, is that you cannot motivate someone. It has to be intrinsic motivation. They have to see what they're missing, and sometimes that can be the voices of their grandchildren. It may be musical piece, but it's got to come from them.
I want to kind of follow up on some other things. When we come back, I want to get into some of those types of not only hearing loss, but talk about some of the things that you do now and your company does that's innovative worldwide. So we'll be back in a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. We're talking with Dr. Meredith Hill, about audiology, not in the sense so much of the very detailed technical pieces of it, but how it affects your life and how it affects those people around you. So stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment.
Just because something may work doesn't mean it's right for your business. Let Star Communications' knowledgeable consultants help you customize a hosted voice system that's right for you. Our dedicated experts work with you to understand your business needs and guide you at every step, from choosing and installing services to ongoing maintenance and support. Contact Star today.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Wish You Knows on there. I want to thank you for being with us today. We're talking with Dr. Meredith Hill. We're talking about hearing and understanding what that sound is and what it's saying to us. Med-EL that you're now working with, and I think I said earlier, one of the 3 major innovators in the world, an Austrian company. I want to kind of open the door to look at some of the things you're doing. But in doing that, I want to talk a bit about the types of hearing loss and get into those areas of conductive and sensorial kinds of hearing.
Sure.
And lay it out for folks. So at this segment, I guess I'd like to deal a little more with the complexity of the inner ear. And also something that I read that just kind of stuck with me is that there is part of the hearing process that does not deal with the structure or fundamental of the ear, that it has to do with brain and neuron connectors. Let's go down that road
Sure.
without getting it too complicated that I don't understand it.
Sure. So that's why I set you up in the last segment to say that there's a lot that has to take place from the time that sound leaves my mouth and gets to your ear. I said ear, but really it is your brain, because it is how your brain interprets that sound as to what determines what you hear. So going back to the ear structure and the 3 parts of the ear, that's really where and how you can break down the types of hearing loss. So that conductive hearing loss is when sound waves or sound cannot conduct through the entirety of the ear system, whether that's because there's fluid in that middle ear space that stops it from conducting, because as we know, sound doesn't travel very well underwater or in water, or perhaps it's those teeny tiny middle ear bones I referred to earlier. They've gotten stuck together, they're not moving, they're not conducting the sound, hence the conductive hearing loss. Then we need to investigate what kind of solution is available for that, because that solution looks a whole lot different than going in and addressing a sensory neural or a nerve type of hearing loss like we discussed in the last segment. A potential conductive hearing loss solution could be something like surgery. Surgery, you can go in and drain that fluid with an ear tube, or you can go in and use prosthetic bones to replace the middle ear bones, and then they will work and conduct sound. So there are different types of solutions in place depending on the hearing loss. Our company actually offers bone conduction devices. What that means is you can hear through bone, you can hear through vibration. You know that sound, if you are to plug your ears and chew some potato chips, it's loud. It's loud, try it sometime. And that's actually hearing through bone conduction, because your entire head and your teeth, all bone. And when you are making that vibration, making that sound, you are hearing it through bone conduction. So we have a hearing device in place. It's called the Adhere. And it actually just sticks via an adhesive on the bone. Feel back there behind your ear. There is a prominent bone that sticks out, and you place the adhesive on that bone and you snap the Adhere device to that. Sounds come in, and don't get me wrong, this is not some vibrating hearing aid sitting on the back of your ear. It's all very micro vibration, but through that, it transmits through the bone and goes to the nerve. Because again, you're only as good as your nerve hearing is. And if you have a perfectly good nerve, but just no way to conduct, then the adhere is a perfect solution.
This is not a surgical process at all.
Non-surgical whatsoever. In fact, I'll tell you the perfect candidate. There are babies born all the time that congenitally have malformations or defects, including missing the entirety of the outer ear structure. They're born without an ear, essentially. And if you just have no funnel and everything else is intact, including a normal nerve, you pop this on, it vibrates and it stimulates that nerve. It essentially takes the place of their outer ear.
Does that supplant if there's lost hearing hair particles? Does that?
So what you're getting at is actually a mixed type of hearing loss.
Yeah.
So you can have both. You can have the sensory neural portion, which is the nerve damage, the damage to the hair cells, and conductive component as well. And in that case, that is a mixed hearing loss. We too have a solution for that. It is a surgical option, but it also employs a sort of bone conduction device on the outside, and that's our bone bridge. It's essentially a bridge between the outer and inner ear. So, there's all different types and degrees of hearing loss, and we have all different types of solutions just depending on those.
Being a company that's focused on innovation and new technologies, where have we come from, say, in just the past 5 to 6 years? Because I know the last time we talked, there was a lot of things that we're talking about now that was not on the table. Do you see this same multiplier of innovation going forward in 5 or 6 years?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, that was one of the things that I was most excited to come today and talk about, is because when I reflect back on our first interview, some of the things we talked about then are a reality now. And our portfolio has really exploded in the last 5, 6, 7 years. I will have been with MED-EL in June 8 years. And back then we had first generation devices. Now we're on second and third generation of those devices, new devices. We have now Bluetooth accessories to go with these devices. So that's an avenue that you're going to see explode, is the Bluetooth and the wireless accessories component, not just the bread and butter of cochlear implants and hearing devices, but the accessories to help make people's everyday lives more convenient and more mainstream. So yes, that has been a big change in the last few years. And then probably the piece that I'm most excited about but have the least information about is what is called our TICI, T-I-C-I, totally implantable cochlear implant. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Does that supplant the cochlea if you put, quote, I mean, just listening, it sounds like you're saying, well, we're just going to surpass the existing cochlea, or does that just augment this cochlea?
So basically, our cochlear implants, as they are right now, do take the place of the cochlea. They are inserted in the cochlea. However, they cannot function without an external piece, a microphone piece. It looks very much like a hearing aid that has to be worn on the exterior and has a battery life, a power supply, a microphone, and a transmitter to send that sound via a magnet to the internal implant. This TICI that I'm referring to removes the need for anything to be worn externally. Everything, battery, power, transmitter, microphone, implant, you name it, all implanted under the skin.
It's kind of amazing when you think about where we're headed with this. And it's something that just struck me, and I noticed in one particular article, battery companies have now started this process of creating new dynamic forms of battery capability that last months or even several years. Is that part of it, this kind of science that they're looking at trying to keep up with?
Absolutely. It has to be, because you think about the voltage required to keep a device like this going. If it is going to be fully implantable, you're going to have to rely on a power supply that can withstand weeks, months, even years. As it is right now, even with our rechargeable devices, on a full lithium ion charge, you can get 24 hours. That's great. Still requires the piece externally to be worn, but it's not requiring constant changing of batteries. We're going even beyond that with this totally implantable cochlear implant.
It's kind of a fascinating time. I mean, you've got to be totally excited about where you are. How does the innovators look at things going forward that we don't see? I mean, with your background in audiology and of course academic credentials and experience credentials, is that a vital piece, just knowing about it, or is there something kind of off the path that all of a sudden you see and go, wow, you know, a butterfly or something can do that. Why can't we do this? How does that come about? Where does that energy?
Honestly, I can't take the credit. I can tell you that even with my credentials and my experience, I don't live that life that an implant recipient lives. Our inspiration, our education, and our knowledge, our foundation for improving our devices comes from our users, because they are the people that are using it day in and day out. They are the ones telling us, providing the feedback, saying, hey, wouldn't it be really cool if it could do this? Hey, your ears are able to do this. Can you make my ear able to do this?
Yeah.
So I don't take the credit. It comes strictly from our users. We have a great R&D team, absolutely. But at the end of the day, I can't pretend to know as much about an implant as the person who's implanted with it.
And getting that back to that point, and we're coming up on a break, I want to kind of set the stage for our last segment here. But there's a company, not a company, but a university in Milan, Italy. And one of the things that struck me is that the age of hearables is fast approaching. And the idea behind what their research is showing is that we will soon be, or at the precipice with hearing, as we are with a watch that we can use with connectivity on the internet. And I want to kind of set the stage for folks and maybe get into that field a little bit. And actually what it talks about is that we are at the point in our history that we can literally create superhumans. So let's lead out with that and come back with that thought. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We're having an exciting conversation with Dr. Meredith Hill about audiology, about where it's at, where it's going, and what the future is. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment.
To get the most out of your electronic devices, you need a strong internet connection and a protected home Wi-Fi network. You need high-speed internet from Star. Star has the fastest, most affordable high-speed internet service available for all your devices. We have no long-term contracts or high-pressure sales. Our service speaks for itself, and switching is hassle-free. We take care of everything with free installation from a local company. High-speed internet from Star. Internet at the speed of life.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We're coming up on our last segment here on We Should Know. I want to remind you and thank you at the same time for your contact information, for emailing us at weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. That's weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And while I say that, I want to give a shout out to Brent up in Wake County. Reached out to us several weeks back, and we've been trying to put this together. Hopefully we'll have it ready to go. Brent, thank you for your comment and suggestion about a show, and we get these quite often, and I'm more than happy to look into it and kind of get the research together and get the experts on to talk about it. So thank you for that. Also, remember you can reach us via what we call snail mail. That's Post Office Box 1482, Clinton, North Carolina 28322. 828. That's Post Office Box 1482, Clinton, North Carolina. Look forward to seeing you. And of course, our shows are uploaded to social media platforms, YouTube and others after they air. And we appreciate, again, all of those comments. Today, we're talking about a fascinating subject. Dr. Meredith Hill, audiologist, graduate of UNC, at the time, one of 8 people that walked out of there with a doctorate in audiology. So, Meredith, thank you for being with us with the show, but I want to kind of get into some of this innovative stuff. And it's, to me, the scientific piece, where we're headed. The article I read from Humanitas University in Milan said new technology could turn us into super heroes.
Well,
now that's kind of a big statement, but the point is that they were comparing where we're going and our capacity with Audible as what we're seeing now with smartphones and other things. Our information is just exploding and what we can do with that.
Yeah, it is. And I will say it's already termed bionic ear, these cochlear implants, and the worlds are colliding. The technology piece with the medical device world, it's just one and the same, because you think about how closely people are tied to their technologies nowadays. Even currently with our products, we have apps for the phone that you can use to change your program on your device, turn up the volume or turn it down. Whereas years before, you had to carry around a remote control just like you would with your television. Now there's no need for that piece. We figure folks already have their smartphones on them at all times anyway. Just make an app that will act as the remote control. There's also the element of Bluetooth accessories, which I touched on in the previous segment. We have devices that allow you to stream your phone calls directly into your device, stream music directly into your device. So if you were a cochlear implant recipient, you could be sitting here streaming music to your device. No one would ever know. It's going straight to your hearing. No one around you is hearing it. So there are definitely pieces of the technology world that we're already at play with.
The graduation to these new innovative devices, and we all fair were talking a bit about a while ago, the world that we live in. There's these areas that maybe doesn't have it advantage to reaching and connecting with folks. How important is it for us in our listening area of ever how many counties, 8 or 10 counties, to understand the critical importance of living this close to the research triangle where a lot of this stuff is really happening? I mean, we're on the outskirts, yes, but we're also in a position to be able to capitalize on that.
Absolutely, and I'll just tell you, those outskirts just keep expanding, and so you really are within spitting distance of some really great resources, some great technology, universities, hospitals, you name it. And going back to that education piece, it's important to be your own advocate and to speak for your own health care, but it's also important to know where to go, those specialties and those specialists that you would go to and seek out so that you can maintain your health care. So we were talking about earlier, it is important for people to stay aware and to stay educated on their hearing and their hearing loss, get it tested, set a baseline, follow that baseline over the years. And my recommendation obviously is that be done through an audiologist who has the training and the expertise to know how to follow your hearing health care.
I want to circle back just based on that comment. I want to circle back to something you were talking about a while ago about the enunciation piece and the vowel piece. It is part of having an audiologist go through that process and understand what you're not hearing to be able to amplify that. Does that make the critical difference between just buying the next device from a brand company because they can't do that? Is that the reason?
Absolutely. So an audiologist is trained to look at the whole piece, and we've covered just how many pieces there are to that puzzle. And so your audiologist is going to test you thoroughly through all of the types of conduction to cover all of the potential types of hearing loss that we've already discussed today. They will also test speech and words, because so much of that is not just the hearing, but the understanding piece. So that can let them know that's a predictor of performance with a hearing aid versus an implant. They also have access to testing and equipment that will allow them, once you've been fit with the device, it will actually measure in situ and how the hearing aid will fit and work in your ear. Because one of the things I said earlier, every ear is different, some big, some little, and you cannot globally apply the same fitting measures for every person, every ear. So an audiologist is by far and away the best route.
Is one of the biggest thresholds for people that maybe need hearing assistance one of vanity, in the sense that I'm a certain age, I don't want to display I've got a device in my ear. A few years ago, there was the advent of the things you can stick in your ear and nobody knows you got it. And I've had people in my family like that, and it worked great, but then you get into the battery life and that kind of thing. Have we got to get beyond the vanity?
So there is an element of that you have to get beyond, and that could play a part in that 7-year span we talked about earlier. Mm-hmm. But I will say this, the promising thing is that we're only seeing improvements. We're seeing smaller devices, more mainstream devices. At this point, it's not uncommon to see folks with pods in their ears or Bluetooth devices in their ears. So it's becoming a thing of the future, but a thing of right now. So people shouldn't let vanity be a barrier.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I think if it's earbuds or whatever it is, I mean, it's especially during the pandemic, it seemed like that's ramped up even more. Just observing folks walking on the street with earbuds in, or where they're on a conference call somewhere and some kind of ear device in, and you don't know whether that ear device is something that is augmenting or helping them because they have a hearing issue, or is it just something that they're using to connect with? So. Sure. Are we at that kind of change that we're just morphing into, that we may actually get back to that point a while ago, that we've got these superheroes, they've got things in their ears, and it's not only because they're hearing multiple frequencies, but they couldn't hear.
Right. I hope so. I hope that's the way it's going. I hope that it becomes more accepted and more mainstream and accessible to more folks.
What do you see now, the one thing maybe that you're looking at from your, and I'm gonna consider you a researcher and innovator in the industry. As an innovator in the industry, what do you see coming forward is going to be the most critical, the life-changing thing for audiology?
It's absolutely going to be the totally implantable devices, because at this point, every device has to be maintained. Every external device has to be maintained and is exposed. Anything you wear on your outside, even if that's your watch or your phone to some degree in your pocket, gets exposed to the elements, the dust, the moisture, all of that. So I think that this new wave of totally implantable devices is going to be just groundbreaking.
And that's going to also include expandable capacity for, as you pointed out a while ago, the energy piece.
Right. So there's going to be an element, not in my wheelhouse, but certainly an element of power supply that will play a part in how successful these devices are. And so it's sort of multidisciplinary is this field. It's not just our research and development team, but there are many minds at work here.
And I think that piece is probably the most interesting, and it's got to be so exciting for you as an innovator going forward. And we've kind of come to that point in time that this end of this show, and of course I tell folks that I have on, like you and others, that we could probably do a semester or a series, but I'm going to give you about 20 seconds. Anything you want to toss out or
Sure.
close with?
So I would just encourage folks to prioritize their hearing health and seek out the professionals that are in place to help with that. The audiologist and ear, nose, and throat physicians. Don't let it be something that takes 7 years to pay attention to and to do anything about, because at that point it could be beyond a point of being helped. And always keep abreast of what's going on in the technology field, because like it or not, technology is here and it will likely play an important part in your life in some way. Better to embrace it and learn it.
Thank you for being with us, Dr. Meredith Hill.
Sure.
It's been a pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for being with us today, and hopefully a bit of information will help you, move you forward, or give you some information you need for a friend or someone else. We'll see you again next week right here, and may God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host J.W. Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.